So thank you very much. I appreciate there are some other things going on next door, but I'm going to talk to you about a case study of quite an unusual project, which is about cultural change and organizational change just as much as it is about digital media. It's a project which we were very privileged to work on with two other organizations, so it's interesting also in that it was a triangular project. So the other partners in this project were the principal partners, Qatar Museums, and I'll talk a little more about that in a minute, and the global branding agency Wolf Ollins, and my company Cogapp, which is a digital media agency specializing in this kind of work with cultural organizations. So I'm going to show you, that's a skyline for a city. That city is Doha, and Doha is in the Gulf. It looks like a modern city. It looks like San Francisco. It looks like New York in this view. However, all those buildings have been built in the last 10 years. It's a culture experiencing extraordinary change. And this little video is a view at night of the building of the National Museum of Qatar. All over Doha, there are an enormous number of buildings going up, and some subset of those buildings are museums and cultural organizations being built and developed and then subsequently run by the organization that we were working with here, Qatar Museums. So earlier on this year, their website, Qatar Museums Authority, was rebranded, and it became, from Qatar Museums Authority, it became Qatar Museums, a simpler version, and their website, which had previously looked like this, became this. And I think you can see just in that illustration, you can see an enormous cultural shift. So something which is very conventional, very straightforward, very much what you might expect, to something very much like what you might not expect. And here's why and here's how. So, as I think I've conveyed, the country is in the process of extraordinary change. This is clearly fueled by, initially, the wealth created by their share of a very large natural gas field. But it's also fueled by a national vision. So the government of Qatar has a vision which is expressed in a document talking about 2030, a program to that year, which is about taking advantage of that wealth and creating a society which transcends it, and in particular creating a society which is a knowledge economy in which people are no longer dependent on the mineral wealth, which may after all run out. So Qatar Museums Authority plays its part in this as the organization which is responsible for art, heritage, and creativity, which, as you can see, in that transformation is a key part of the process. And the picture here shows Her Excellency Sheikha Mayasa Al-Thani, who's the chairperson of Qatar Museums, who is leading this process in that organization. And the quotation there, I think, summarizes the issues that we're faced. So we're changing our culture from within. At the same time, we're reconnecting with our traditions. So it's a very fine balance here in a process which is extremely dynamic. So when we talk to people in Doha, they say things like this: that we want traditional stories but told in contemporary ways. So they rightly don't want to lose everything that is no longer represented by that skyline. Doha didn't look like that 20 years ago. It didn't even look like that 10 years ago. So their traditions and the basis of Qatari society is in danger of disappearing under tarmac and buildings. But nevertheless, they're extremely proud, and rightly so, of what they're achieving. So it's this fine balance. So the rebrand, we came into this story, Cogapp, relatively late. So Qatar Museums Authority, as it then was, had decided, as part of their contribution to the national mission, to undertake a rebranding, and they'd engaged Wolf Ollins, who were the organisation that did London 2012, amongst other things. So they did the branding for the London Olympics, and they had been working together as a two-part operation for I think, over a year by the time we hove into view to help them to produce the digital output for the rebrand, which was going to, in this case, going to be a very prominent part of the realization of the new brand. And the delivery principles of the new brand were absolutely radical relative to what had been there before, and very challenging in relation to both the organization and its audience, because it's about taking something and delivering an organization and creating an audience which is energized, which is creative, which is engaged in activities which hadn't previously been engaged in. So the delivery principles are about taking the museums beyond the four walls. So it's not just about building buildings and putting up stuff, which of course is a huge part of the agenda and can become very preoccupying. You know, they're undertaking these enormous capital projects, which are you know, difficult enough for most organizations on their own. But they have to go beyond the four walls. They have to nurture local emerging talent in the context of an international hub, as it's becoming. They need to create a platform for the voice of Qatar in a way which hasn't been done before. And above all, they need to help move the society and the culture forward to create a creation generation, as per the brand principles, a generation which thinks of itself and acts as cultural creators, not just as cultural consumers. So I think I've tried to summarize in this slide what our problems are, but I think I've probably sketched it out pretty effectively. You can see this is quite a challenging brief, and we had to work, all three parties, led by Qatar Museums, working with Wolf Ollins, to try and take those brand principles and try and turn them into an online presence that did them justice, and to make it sustainable as well. So we had to create a technical platform. So it had to be not just a website that was one-off, but rather a system for a website that could be sustained and developed as their program evolved. And the solution, the first few points on this slide are kind of like, oh yeah, of course you'd do that. So you know, we did research, we understood their needs, and we built something which technically works quite well. I think the critical things, the different things, are the last 3 points here. It's about drawing on specialist resources. So all three parties had to work very, very hard to get to the root of this issue, and to come up with something which was both bold and contemporary, but also respectful of and acceptable within the traditional framework, and to embody in the website the brand principles of delivery, which included something much more active than would have normally been expected in this kind of production. So that's, to remind you, that's the journey we went on. And the way we did it was roughly this. So we start as high up as we can. I mean, obviously, in most website projects, you start with the organizational objectives. Here we're starting with the national objectives. So it's kind of one level up from most operations, and then pushing it down through an understanding of what the organization needs, how the organization is changing, what the audience needs, and all the way through down to the design and iterate. So I'll skip through quickly because we're short of time, but essentially we undertook a detailed program of research, both qualitative, so lots of interviews, focus groups, conversations with people, and in the course of it, I think all of us absorbing what's happening, what people respond to, in a situation which is not familiar for anybody. Alongside that, quantitative research as well, and out of that, trying to come up with a strategy document. So I think we found in our work, and I don't know about anybody else, but we found in our work it's very, very important to end the research with a strategy document which is signed off at the very highest level of the organization. So you then have something that you can rest everything else on. You can test your designs against, you can test the work against it, because you know that it's meeting the needs that have been set out and agreed. So we went through that process, and the three parties working together came up with a document that then embodied what we wanted out of the project. So the online strategy was then our foundation. We then go into a kind of, well, a modern version of the classical design process, modern in the sense that it's mobile first, absolutely. It's also working very closely with the design crew at Qatar Museums and Wolf Ollins to interpret the brand. So this is probably at this point the largest sort of interpretation of the brand in any medium. So we're taking their work, which is not so far surfaced because it hadn't been launched. The website was part of the launch of the brand. So we were helping them to refine and extend their brand thinking through the website project, and sitting around with post-it notes as you do. In terms of the mission to involve people, we came up with a number of mechanisms. So there are things dotted around the site that encourage participation, but the thing which we showcased and which we've used in numerous ways in the rollout of the website is this thing, which is a modern take on the ideas of geometric patterns in Islamic art. So this tool, which is called a pattern canvas, the idea is that people can use it to riff on those ideas of repetition and tiling and of arabesque to create 21st century versions of those things on the website. I don't know, has anybody here done any work with Arabic? So Arabic, you'll know then that Arabic typography is an interesting science. There are no capital letters, for example. Handling type, the different forms of the letters don't work in the way that you'd necessarily expect as a Western designer. So we went to considerable lengths with the crew to try to come up with things which worked really, really well both ways around. And we went to considerable lengths to make sure that we tested them with Arabic speakers. Obviously, our handicap is that we don't have Arabic speakers on staff necessarily. So that's where we get to, is this website. If you look at the video on the awards, you'll see what we tried to do was to provide extreme attention to detail in terms of interpreting the brand through the design and through the implementation of that to meet the brief. And I think everybody involved can be very proud of what we've done. I think it's been good. It's been a very, very challenging and interesting project. And if there's any time, I'd happily take questions. Yeah. Any questions? Please.
So I saw similar work in terms of like an online museum from a Canadian research institution working on Indigenous cultures in Canada. One of the overarching themes of the project, which I didn't hear from you, I'd like to hear if you saw that, was that while the elders of the tribe were enthusiastic about the project and wanting to bring the culture out, the youth, because of the sort of more proliferation of globalization through these technologies, were less identifying with that culture and more seeing themselves as global citizens. And I was wondering if you encountered that in your research.
I think it would be simplifying to say it was exactly the same. There are those tensions, and media culture in Qatar is very interesting and probably not entirely what you'd expect. So there's a very high use of mobile phones, very high use of the internet, very high use of some social media sites, and so in some ways very, very advanced. But it's like what you'd expect in San Francisco, but with a twist. And so it's finding that, and there are generational issues, but there are also issues about different parts of what's going on. There's a whole cultural and artistic movement there. So it's very, very interesting world, and be an interesting comparison in more detail with your other project.
Did you find that the culture in this organization, this museum organization, was reflected in the country, or are they an exception, or are they reflecting the culture of the entire country?
Qatar Museums is in a leadership position. It's part of this movement to create the creation generation in fulfillment of this 2030 vision. So it's reflective of the society, but it's also trying to move things on and trying to be active and to encourage change as well, which wouldn't happen naturally. So it is a very, very interesting organization from that point of view. Yeah, no, it's been super great. Okay, I think I'm out of time, sorry, but I'm around and you can find me, and I'm happily talk if anybody's got any questions. So thank you very much.